Great. Okay, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this evening, Monday night at 7:30. We are having a part of Rabbi Rothman's neighborhood, who is part of our community, has been a part of our shul, or a part of the community at large. And this week we have a real pleasure to be able to spend a little bit of time with a personal friend of mine. He's not only himself, but his parents, which is Luis Guzman. Luis is not living in our neighborhood right now. He has been, and maybe with a little effort, he might be again, depending on where our neighborhood is, if it's here or in Israel. But he's got a very interesting story to share with us this evening. I'm going to introduce it a little bit, and then we're going to ask him to add to it. And then any of you who are interested, you're certainly welcome to ask a question. In the meantime, we are broadcasting both on Zoom and on Facebook Live. And so you can see us on Facebook if your Zoom isn't working right. But of course, you wouldn't know that if your Zoom wasn't working right. So we'll start from the beginning. We have Luis Guzman is with us. And I'd like to welcome Luis to our Rabbi Rothman's neighborhood, are getting together once a week to meet people. I'm going to ask Luis if he can tell us just a little bit about his immediate family, who he's living with here in Toronto, and then we'll go and talk a little bit about his background and some of the interesting stories. So Luis, if you would.
Sure. Thank you, Rabbi, and hi, everyone. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share a little bit about my life and our life. So Baruch Hashem, I was married in Jerusalem in 2015, and I've been living with my wife since she moved here. She's Israeli. And we live currently, after living in the Thornhill neighborhood, we currently live in Richmond Hill in the Mill Pond area. And basically my immediate family, my current family, my new family is conformed by my wife, Orel Peretz. And we have three young girls, ages 3, 2, and 1, 15 months apart. And that's with regards to my personal family. My parents also live in Toronto. They live in Thornhill. And my parents are members with at Asia Torah. So both my father, Furman, and Gladys, my mother. And I also have a younger sibling, one of two siblings that all of us together, we've been in touch, and we've been members at the Asia Torah Thornhill Community Shul. And we've been in the neighborhood. My brother currently lives in the area in Thornhill, and I have two nephews, Benjamin and Yitzhak Levi, and that's the immediate family here in Canada. And then of course I have my extended relatives now through marriage in Israel, in Eretz Israel, in the sort of the center of the country in Hadera, close to Caesarea, and Netanya, where I've had the opportunity to travel many times. With our kids and my wife. And unfortunately, because of COVID, right now, we usually have a tradition now for the past 5 years of making it to Eretz Israel for Rosh Hashanah and the high holidays. But this year we're blessed of being here, being healthy, and being in the area.
Okay, so it's a great introduction. Now, I don't know if everyone realizes, although you did see on the flyer, that Luis and his family come from Guatemala. It's not a place that too many of our members come from. We've got a lot of people from South Africa, a lot of people from Montreal, but I don't think we've got too many from Guatemala. So I was wondering if, Luis, you could tell us a little bit of what it's like to live and grow up in Guatemala, and then a bit, if you could, about the Jewish community as well.
Sure thing. So definitely Guatemala, some of you may be more familiar with Costa Rica. Guatemala enjoys similar weather. Population is the largest country in Central America, bordering Mexico. Growing up there, I was born in Guatemala City, and my parents come from different regions in the country, which are, if you want to get a brief description of the culture culture is, it's a clash of two civilizations. Basically, you have the Spanish sort of eastern area where it's very hot, very dry. And then you have the more of the native population that comes from the western part of the country that borders Mexico. So you have the upper plains, and growing up there, it's a Latin American country. Weather is very pleasant, and the Jewish community, Guatemala has had an interesting relationship, I would say, from what I remember as a child. It's been very friendly and very pro-Israel through its United Nations records when it came to voting during the creation of the State of Israel. Definitely was one of the countries that was involved in the lobbying during that year, and definitely voted in favor. Guatemala did not abstain from voting in favor of the creation of the State of Israel, and that friendship and that positive relationship still remains throughout the different democratic governments that have taken place in the country. Most recently, a couple of years ago, Guatemala was also, after the United States, the second country to move its embassy and recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And as a matter of fact, has a street name particularly that way in Guatemala City. Jerusalem, capital of Israel, is the name of the street. As a matter of fact, so it's the Jewish community is small. It's only a few hundred families, but yet its influence, its impact has always been felt, and there's always been a love towards the Jewish people in Israel in particular.
Well, it certainly sounds like a place where Jews could feel relatively secure and happy.
Indeed.
So we spoke a bit about your background, and one of the things that finally, after we spoke for a while, actually came out. Just one second. Okay, sorry. So one of the things that we spoke about was the effect of the people known as the Anusim. They're the people who were forced to give up Judaism. We all know about them back in the 1400s with the Spanish Inquisition, and that the Jews at that time were forced to give up Judaism or be killed. And over the period of time, many of those people who gave up Judaism openly, but kept Judaism privately, over the period of time sort of became commingled among the non-Jews, and in many cases became lost. However, it's in Central America and in South America, there is a significant number of people who identify as what we'd call the Anusim, or they were really, in a pejorative way, were called Marranos or other similar names. But we spoke a bit about that. Can you tell us a little bit about the community and some of the information that you shared with me earlier about them?
Oh, sure, definitely, Rabbi. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, it's actually something that's quite interesting and quite exciting, actually, because it speaks to, I guess, to the history of the Jewish people in Latin America. It's only now beginning to be awakened. People are now starting to become aware that, hey, it wasn't just Spanish, the Spanish that came in the ships, in the famous conquistador ships. It was actually Spanish Jews that were coming in those ships, and who were hiding their Judaism and in fact escaping from the Inquisition in Spain. And so there's a gentleman that we discussed earlier on, Rabbi Ashley Perry, who used to work for the Ministry of Diaspora for the government of Israel, you can search him up, you can Google him up, you can see him in the Jerusalem Post, you can see him on podcasts, and you can hear his research. And he's actually set up, the government of Israel has an initiative called Reconectar, which means to reconnect, both in Spanish and in Portuguese, because of the Jews also that escaped through Portugal and later on went to Brazil, the Portuguese speaking country in South America. And I guess a lot of people that went into hiding really tried to deny their Judaism because the Inquisition followed through the Americas. There are records of the Inquisition and people being rounded up and burned or being tortured in Mexico and in Venezuela. In fact, one of the northern cities in Mexico, Monterrey, was founded by a Jew who tried to establish the city 3 times, and in his 3rd attempt he succeeded, only years later to be unfortunately taken by the Spanish Inquisition over his dietary cuisine. In his home, people were really looking out, and they found out that he was cooking some Jewish dish, or perhaps baking matzot and whatever it was, and they caught him. And even though he founded that city, which is an industrial city today in Mexico, and unfortunately he was killed. So I guess the history now of the Jews of Spain who went into hiding now is starting to be acknowledged and to be researched. There is even an estimate as far as with regards to DNA of over 100 million Latin Americans having Jewish DNA. And that's something that you can verify in reliable sources in newspapers. And so there's this whole initiative where the government of Israel is trying to tackle the issue of these people recognizing that they have minhagim, they have customs, and they have, and if they have an interest to reconnect to their roots, then the state of Israel is coming up with this this initiative and trying to work things out and come up with a plan of how to deal with such a vast number of people.
Yeah, it certainly would be an extraordinary change for the Jewish people to find so many people who are, who have a Jewish background. In fact, you sent me a link and I looked at it today about the work that this fellow was doing in order to take the people who came to him who were among this community, the Anusim, who were trying to identify themselves. And as you said, he went through a lot of names, surnames of people that were known as Jewish surnames. But what's interesting is that all of the surnames that he mentioned were explicitly Catholic. They were like Church was one of the names. And what had happened is that the Jews, in order to save themselves, when they took last names, they took last names that were obviously ones that would be of a Catholic person. Eventually, those names stuck around, and now you have Jews, right, with all types of names that are actually very, very Catholic sounding, and you don't have it as common among the Catholics as you do among the Jews.
That's right.
So that was quite an interesting addition to the story. But what we see then is that theoretically, right, you could have hundreds of thousands, or maybe tens of thousands, but could be hundreds of thousands of people who are not right now identifying as being Jewish, but who have Jewish DNA and very well may be Jewish. Like one of the examples we discussed today was our own mayor here in Toronto, John Tory. John Tory is, according to Jewish law, is Jewish. His mother was Jewish, his grandmother on his mother's side was Jewish. And if you ask him, he'll tell you that according to Jewish law, I'm Jewish. I was raised Christian and I practice Christianity. But as I mentioned earlier, I've seen a photograph of him where some of the Chabad guys got a hold of him and put tefillin on him. And I saw the picture of it. So you certainly have people in the world who are like this. And I think that it's much more prevalent in Central and South America, if for no other reason that it has the Latin culture, which is so similar to the culture they had when they were in Spain and Portugal and these areas. So they were able to go without having to learn a new language, change cultures and so forth. They were able to assimilate in these new countries with the hope to be able to live freely as Jews, which they weren't able to do, but maybe many of them now will be. But that's on a on a general level. But let's now take this conversation personally.
Sure.
I'm not speaking out of school to mention that many of you know who know Luis and his family. That they were not Jewish when we first met them. It's actually not so easy to believe because they lead services, they know Hebrew, they're very well versed. They don't seem like beginners, but that's the case. And Luis explained to me a bit about his upbringing and how that affected what eventually became a search for truth and religion. So maybe you could tell us a bit about when you grew up and the practices that you had in your home, as you explained to me personally.
Sure, with pleasure. So growing up in Guatemala, I guess before I myself, I'm the eldest son, and before I was born, my parents, consciously, Guatemala being a Catholic country officially, they decided to practice a different type of Christianity, which is, I guess, well known in North America as Seventh-day Adventists. So Adventists have this concept of a Saturday, of a Sabbath, right? Very similar to a Shabbat. And when I grew up, and when my brother and I grew up, we took part, and we grew up in this environment, going to services Friday evenings, Saturday mornings, and Saturday afternoons. So there was some sort of a concept of the idea of Shabbat. and the Jewish people. Now, of course, as Christians, we never, thought of ourselves as being Jews. We always thought of ourselves as being Latinos, Latin Americans, with a particular faith that was very similar to the Jewish people. But interestingly enough, as I mentioned to you, Rabbi, even though the tradition in Latin America is to have kids, babies, baptized or immersed in something like a mikvah, my parents decided not to follow that tradition because they wanted specifically for, I guess, their children to do their own search and make their own decision to see if that's what they wanted to practice when they grew up. And that's exactly what happened with me personally. So we lived in Guatemala during, I guess, a bit of a conflictive time. Central America went through a rough decade in the 80s and also in the 90s. Through an internal conflict, which anyway led to us leaving the country and choosing to come to Toronto. When we came here, we of course were exposed to a practicing diaspora Jewry, where we could, publicly see people wearing a kippah and wearing tzitziot, which is something that I don't recall seeing as a child in Guatemala, even though we were aware of the Jewish people and of Israel. So that impacted us in a way, subconsciously, where at some point after I finished my undergrad, I decided to question more in depth and have a closer relationship with the Almighty. And through friends of the family, actually Spanish-speaking Jews from my mom's side, a Venezuelan dentist who happens to be my dentist, she's the one who was the link for me to go to the village shul after years of speaking with her and exchanging conversations such as, for example, what you mentioned earlier, Rabbi, about the Anusim, because I remember reading in the New York Times, quite a few years ago, about the history of some of the Jews in Peru that were lost to the rubber trade in the Amazon. There were Jews that were trading back in the, I guess, 1500s and 1600s. They were going up with their ships and, settled, created settlements, upstream in the river banks. And after the rubber trade dried up, they were sort of left there stuck with their customs and with Jewish customs. And I remember discussing that with my dentist. And she, of course, being a practicing Orthodox Jewish woman herself, a member of the village shul. I remember how reading, we discussed how, I guess the general consensus of the Jewry that came after the Second World War and settled, in the capital in Lima. There was a little bit of I don't know if it was a machloket, if you would say it, but there was certainly lack of knowledge of what to do. Are these claims pure? Are they not pure? Eventually, I think, if I recall correctly, there was a rabbi from Israel that was actually sent to verify this. And some of them were actually brought, some of these people that came from literally out of the jungle, they were brought into Israel, and some of them made aliyah. So it was this type of conversation, this thinking, and all of these conversations that I would have with my dentist that eventually led me to feel comfortable and ask her. It was through her kindness, her willingness to share her knowledge, to debate, to discuss, that I felt comfortable and asked her where could I, learn more about Judaism as a way of life. And that's when I was introduced to the village shul, and that's when I walked into the village shul for the first time in 2008. And as it happened to be that I mentioned to you, I don't think it's coincidence, but it happened to be that I walked in, the first Shabbat that I walked in, it was Erev Matan Torah, so Shavuot. And, I being used to the concept of, going to services morning and afternoon, of course, I didn't shy away from learning about this holiday, about the giving of the Torah.
So it was a very worthwhile introduction. But then you began an actual process of conversion, which, in Toronto, it's known that our conversion process is very rigorous. And it's one of the few in the world that is never questioned. If someone converts through our Beis Din, through our court here, wherever they go in the world, when people ask, to verify that they're Jewish, so if they show that they were converted in the Toronto Beis Din, there's never any further questions, because the Toronto Beis Din is difficult, it's rigorous, it's time-consuming, it expects a lot from the people who go through it. But then when you've gone through it, right, you've got everything you need. and people are very, around the world are very respectful of all of those people who've converted through our Beis Din. Now, you went through that process. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about the process that you experienced. I know I wasn't a part of it at the last perhaps 9 months, but you were involved much longer than that. Perhaps would you explain to people a little bit what goes on in this process here?
Sure, of course. Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, I guess as we know from the Megillat Ruth, there is definitely the interest for the sake of the purity of the spiritual well-being of the nation to ensure that anyone who is interested in converting to Judaism, that they are legitimate and that they have good intentions and true intentions. And so that was part of the process. But when the goal is so precious, time is not something that bothered me or my family. What became very interesting about throughout this process, Rabbi, was immediately as we prepared to learn and engage the customs and the Hagiyim and preparing for the high holidays. If I can just briefly mention back to the first time I stepped into the village hall in 2008, I discussed with you, Rabbi, the fact that just before Sukkot, I saw a video online about a Jewish man from Spain explaining the requirements of the Arba Minim, and when I shared that with my father, he immediately shared with me that he knew exactly what the criteria was for the different species, because he used to, as a matter of fact, have that custom with his mom back in a small town called Balbarina in Guatemala, which is the Spanish part of Guatemala. So throughout this process, yes, we knew that we were converting, but at the same time, as we became more involved, we realized that from my father's side, definitely that there were a lot of customs that were Jewish, and that I guess over the centuries, since being kicked out of Spain, somehow were conserved. But we had no documentation, we had no certificates, no proofs of anything. So we had no choice, as we saw it, but to go through the rigorous process. And of course, we got close to it, later on in the process, to a very good rabbi from the Thornhill Community Shul who was able to guide us through that rigorous process. But it was I would say that as much as it was an experience in researching, it was also an experience of discovering the roots. Although halachically we may not have been considered Jews, and we're not, that's what we had to convert, there definitely was clear evidence of our ancestry with regards to customs. Now, that being said, the process took, I stepped into the village in 2008 and I finished in 2014, just before Yom Kippur. So it was a protracted process. And everyone has their own path. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to take up a number of years, but it certainly takes, the time that it takes. And in our case, it was the whole family. It was my parents, it was my brother was pursuing his conversion, I was pursuing my conversion. So it was the four of us going through this. It wasn't just by myself. And that was an essential part of the process, because when it came time to keep kosher, right? I needed the support. I was single. I wasn't married. I never lived with anyone. And if I wanted to keep kosher, I needed a little bit of help from mommy and daddy. And they were there, Baruch Hashem, to, fall in. Doing it not just because of what I wanted, my brother and I wanted to do, but they were doing it for themselves, for perhaps realizing now we see, the hand of Hashem, why we, experienced such a difficult time in Guatemala, that all of a sudden we had to leave in haste, kind of a thing. And realizing that, Toronto was the place to be, as, perhaps one of the first steps towards, a future in Israel at some point, because we are interested at some point in making Aliyah. And, it's a growing process that commenced, if you will, in some subconscious way when I was a kid and I wasn't brought to a Catholic church. It continued when I moved with my family to Canada, and B'ezrat Hashem, it will continue as we make efforts to eventually make Aliyah to Israel.
Well, it's a wonderful goal. And in the meantime, I know you've been involved with different parts of the community here, because you've moved a few times, and now it's you're setting your sights for Israel. When you go to Israel, do you have an idea of where you want to affiliate, like with Ashkenaz, with Sephardim, in a big city, a small town? What are you guys looking at?
So it's a tough question, Rabbi, but it's a very good question. It's funny that you mentioned that because the first trip I took to Israel was back in 2012. I was in between terms from my master's in business administration here at the Schulich School of Business, and I took the opportunity of that winter break to go to Israel. And I remember visiting a friend from the village shul who was living at the time in Haifa, and had the opportunity to attend services there. And as a matter of fact, I actually bumped into another Guzman, another young man like myself from the United States, who was English speaking, not Spanish speaking anymore, who was also going through conversion. And actually, my contact from the village shul who had made Aliyah to Israel, called me and he said, "Look, there's another Guzman here like you, just making conversion right now." So in terms of where I would like to live, personally, I like the view of the Yam HaTichon, the Mediterranean Sea from Haifa, from the mountains of Haifa, from the Har Carmel. I love that. But spiritually, I think my wife and I, our goal is to be in Jerusalem. So there's a couple of places that we are interested in, but the immediate family lives close to Caesarea in Hadera, which is a growing city next to Netanya. Which is also booming in terms of real estate. It's just incredible the amount of real estate, and as you probably know, Rabbi, I like real estate. It's something that I'm very much involved in, and that's one of the reasons why I've moved around so much. Baruch Hashem, and we look forward to getting further guidance from Hashem. But it looks like Jerusalem is our top choice because of education as well for the kids and the English-speaking community for the children. I think those are the considerations that we're having. And of course, now with the new Israeli infrastructure, which is just amazing with regards to the train, we were there last year for the high holidays, and just seeing the number of highways and the number of trains, rapid trains that are connecting Jerusalem to Tel Aviv and Ben Gurion, and everything is more practical that way. So I think that's going to be the place to be for us, at the beginning.
Right. Well, it certainly is a great option to start at the top, to start in line, right?
Go big or go home.
Right. It certainly is. I think all of us would like to be there. It'll be quite expensive, but if we're able to do it, that's a place that certainly all of us would want to live. And I actually had been lived for a short while in Hadera also.
Oh.
When I was a student. We lived in Hadera, Pardes Chana, Yevarada, that whole area between Hadera and Zichron Yaakov.
Yes.
And it's a beautiful area. Zichron Yaakov is extraordinarily beautiful, as is Caesarea. So that whole area is really very nice. And but Jerusalem is still Jerusalem, right? It's like for people who like cities, New York is New York, and you can live in lots of other places, but it's not New York. And when it comes to the beauty of the world and the importance of the world, Jerusalem is Jerusalem, and there's nothing else like it. So I hope that your dream will come true, and that you guys will all spend your time there and live there and raise your children there.
Thank you for the bracha, Rabbi.
Thanks. In the meantime, how are your children are settling in well where you are? Like, tell us a bit about the part of the city that you live in and what it's like there, because you're a little bit out of the community, right, or out of the older community, maybe in a newer area.
That's right. So actually, as part of planning towards a longer term plan for making Aliyah, one of the opportunities we took advantage of a couple of years ago with my wife was to look for a bigger place, and we live in the Mill Pond community, which is just north of Major Mackenzie and south of Elgin Mills. We are sort of sandwiched in between Yonge Street and Bathurst. We are within walking distance of the Chabad Romano Center up north. And basically, there's quite a number of Jewish households with Baruch Hashem with mezuzot in their front doors. The community is very eclectic. There is members that are very observant, and there are more conservative observant people, and but it's very friendly. It's a wonderful area, and from a perspective of nature, it's great. A block and a half away from where we live, we can walk into the northern pond. For me, it was a surprise. I wasn't aware until I moved into the neighborhood. I always only knew about the Mill Pond, which is the one that you see on Mill Street, north of Major Mackenzie, but I wasn't aware that there's another, a smaller pond, a northern pond, just when you go through the trail. So it's definitely very beautiful. It's very it's a great environment for young families, for kids. There's, lots of parks, lots of open space. It's great for walking and hiking. We're not that far away from the Oak Ridges area, which is also another area that is further north. So, Richmond Hill is very nice. Of course, it's not as nice as Thornhill, because, we don't have the community, and having every neighbor that we can just run to and talk and do that. But it is an area that is growing, and there's a lot of rotation of people coming in, a lot of people retiring and moving out and downsizing, and younger families coming in, and it's a wonderful area. But again, it's a sacrifice. It's a short-term sacrifice for Bezrat Hashem, a longer term plan of moving to Israel and doing something with the lot, which is larger than it would be in Thornhill.
Sure. Now, but there is a synagogue there, and there is somewhat of a community there, correct?
There is. As a matter of fact, there are two communities. There is just south, about a couple of blocks south of Major Mac on Bathurst, there is a JRCC, a Jewish Russian community synagogue, which is in the works. It's actually it's going through the process of city permits and studies for approval. So that's in the works. And then for people that live, closer to Elgin Mills, like in our case, there's the Chabad Romano that was just expanded, and it's in the process of completing its mikveh. And it's become really a social center, because now with the expansion, there is a lot of space for simchas. Of course, COVID got in the way, but the capacity is there. And there's also a gun also for kindergarten age children, such as my children, our children with my wife, that can attend there within close proximity. So it is a thriving community, and I'm now speaking about both the east side of Bathurst, and then there's also the west side of Bathurst, which is also, there's a lot of Jewish families in the area.
Oh, it's nice to hear, but you still have to come down here to get a shawarma, right?
That's right. And our only chance to do that is in the wintertime, Rabbi. So I'm looking forward to the change in time zone, because in the fall time, because in the summertime there's no way we can make it down there, but in the wintertime we can venture out after Shabbat.
All right, good. Well, we'll look forward to running into one of the restaurants somewhere around the area. So it's been so far a very interesting talk. We've talked about Guatemala, about what your life was like there, what your life was when you came here, the big change in your family's life, of becoming Jewish and very proudly and involved Jews. And all of us who know you and know your parents and your brother, all feel like you're part of us. It's hard. I think it's hard for many of the people who are listening to even imagine what you went through, because it's so natural, right? You're so natural. You're Hebrew, your davening skills, you're leading the services, you're singing with your father are really, and it makes you seem to be more at ease with your Jewish self, as if you always were. So it could be that your feelings of that you came from families of Jews that got lost, very well may be very realistically true. In fact, the mysticism talks about the idea of how you can have Jews who are good people, but in very difficult situations, and they end up getting lost to the Jewish nation. But Hashem never forgets the good things that people do. And it could be 2 generations, it could be 5 or 6 generations later, that one member of that of the offspring from that person, their great grandchildren, will suddenly decide out of the blue to become Jewish, and they don't really necessarily know why. And it appears that may have been the case with you all, because certainly it's so natural for you. It's like it's not stilted. It doesn't seem like you're lost. It's like, as I said, I think many of the people who are watching today very well may not have known that, and had they known, they even become skeptical of what they know themselves.
Baruch Hashem. I do want to take the opportunity, Rabbi, also, speaking of Baruch Hashem, the ability to participate in services. I want to thank you and the community for always welcoming and being open to, having someone like myself, lead services whenever the opportunity arises. It's something that my father and I enjoy very much, and we definitely take it to heart. It's one of the things that I've always personally tried to work on, and it's the process of practicing repetition and repetition, taking the time in the morning to do it, and to make it as if I'm leading services. I remember doing that for many years, but also I wanted to also, speaking of people that have Baruch Hashem helped in this process, one of my good acquaintances from the village, the Berg family, Michael Berg being the youngest of the Berg siblings, he really took it upon himself when I first started going to the village shul to teach me the basics of the Aleph base. I didn't go to, obviously, through Hebrew school. When I was here growing up in Canada, I went through the public system. I went through to Harvard Collegiate Institute, down by Bathurst and Bloor. And so Hebrew to me was really a challenge when I first walked into the shul. But because of the network of people, because of the people that come to Asia Torah, because of their Jewish upbringing and the ability to share that with others, and really Michael, being maybe at least 10 years, younger than I, he was very patient, and he was like my personal tutor. And I really have to, recognize his contribution, because if it wasn't because of his tutoring that he would do, I wouldn't have been able to so easily and readily embrace Hebrew and become so comfortable with the Siddur, and be able to articulate and to be able to pronounce and to be able to sing. So that's something that definitely, it speaks to the community, it speaks to the people that are part of Asia Torah. You see it in the yeshiva in Jerusalem, but you also see it every day in every household that I've had a chance to visit that are part of the community. Everyone, I want to thank everyone who welcomed us throughout the process and invited us as guests in their home. Thank you to all, because it was thanks to your inspiration and the fact that we were being embraced that really helped us through the challenging times when you need motivation.
Well, thank you. It's certainly, I think everyone agrees, it's our privilege to have the Guzmans as a part of our community. And we hope that before you make your trip to Israel, that you'll spend a couple of Shabbases with us and lead the services with your beautiful voice and with your father, helping you out, backing you up. And we'll certainly look forward to it.
Sounds good, Rabbi. Thank you so much.
All right. So with that, do we have any other parting words that you'd like to say to everybody? I mean, you just did it, but if there's anything else, we'd be glad to have you.
Well, without, of course, forgetting, Rabbi, your family, every one of the members of your household being very special people. And thank you so much for inspiring us in the shul and always helping us to stick together, reminding us that we have to love each other and that we have to feel, we have to be a community, a unit. And that's very important in any time, whether it's COVID, whether it's any challenge, we have to do it. And thank you for your leadership.
It's certainly my pleasure. I appreciate your saying so. And I hear we had a second from Stephen Becker's dog, right? So, Stephen, your dog said hello.
I heard him. I think he was talking Spanish. I think that was in Spanish.
I think so.
Actually, we were all, the whole family was practicing our Spanish. I thought this was going to be conducted in Spanish.
It was. I did find it interesting that you shift your dog, and it worked. I tried.
¿Cómo estás?
So,
¿Cómo estás, señor?
Muy bien, gracias a Dios.
Okay, so I want to let everyone go. It's been a pleasure, Luis. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. I'm sure they did. And you have to say hi to your family for us, who didn't enter the picture, but they're certainly a part of everything you said. And we'll look forward to seeing you and the rest of your family soon. And it was a real pleasure this evening getting to know you a bit better. So now when everybody sees you, they'll be able to speak to you all about Guatemala and about all of your future aspirations for living in Israel. So thank you again for your time. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.